Good evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you are on this beautiful planet. This is Rebecca Jernigan coming to you live from the heart of America to around the globe via the World Wide Web, journeying into the realms of the known to the unknown. You're listening and watching Journeys with Rebecca from Project Camelot TV Network. Thank you, everyone. Welcome, and I'm so very, very happy to introduce to you guys my guest for today. His name is Professor Brant Cortright, and he has written, his latest book is on the neurogenesis diet and lifestyle, upgrade your brain and upgrade your life. And I've done some research on Professor Cortright's work, and he has really made some very significant breakthroughs in how to keep ourselves younger no matter how old we are. And I think there's quite a few of you out there, I know my hand is raised, could use some of this information. Dr. Cortright, Professor Cortright, he's one and the same. He's done an extensive amount, as I said, of research. And what I'd like to do now is to bring him on and have him kind of just introduce himself and how he got into the whole idea of neurogenesis, and maybe you can even explain, Professor Cortright, of what neurogenesis actually stands for, so that our audience can be a little bit more educated, because I know I certainly got an education through your book.
Okay, yeah, thank you for having me on. So I got interested in neuroscience, the brain, really through consciousness. My major interest professionally and personally has really been consciousness on every level: body, heart, mind, and spirit. And what this led me to really was focusing on the brain as well, because everything we experience in our consciousness we experience through our brain, right? Every physical sensation, every emotion that we have, every hope, every dream, every thought we have, and every spiritual state that we experience, we all experience it through the brain. And if the quality of our brain is low, the quality of our consciousness is not going to be what it could be. And if the quality of our brain is high, we're going to have the optimal possibility for consciousness expansion and deepening. So in focusing on the brain and neuroscience, I learned about this paradigm shift that's occurred in neuroscience about 15 years ago, when they discovered that neurogenesis happens throughout our lifetime. So what neurogenesis is it's the process of making new brain cells, right? It's the genesis of new neurons, the birth of new brain cells in the brain. And they used to believe that we stopped growing new brain cells once we were in our early 20s or so. And after that, it was just a slow, gradual die-off. And then 15, 17 years ago, they discovered that no, actually the brain makes new brain cells throughout our entire lifetime. And for a long time, they didn't know what the significance of this was. But recently, past 5 or 10 years, it's become clear that our rate of neurogenesis, that is the rate at which we make new brain cells, has a very powerful effect on the quality of our brain and the quality of our life. So a low rate of neurogenesis, a low rate of making new brain cells, is associated with cognitive decline, with memory problems, with anxiety, with stress, and with depression, as well as health problems, lowered immunity. And the opposite, high rates of neurogenesis, are associated with cognitive enhancement, rapid learning, problem solving, robust emotional resilience, protection from anxiety, stress, and depression, and heightened immunity. So it turns out that our rate of neurogenesis is about the most important biomarker for brain health and for the quality of life that most people have never heard of. And most of this literature is just in the neuroscience literature, and I thought everybody needs to know about this. Neuroscience is too important just to be left to the neuroscientists. Everybody needs to know about this. And so this book is about how to increase your rate of neurogenesis. And it turns out that just about all of us can increase our rate of neurogenesis by 5 times, with really quite astonishing effects on our brain health and on the quality of our life, that we are just about all operating way below capacity, way below where we could be. And we never knew this until a few years ago. This is brand new, like really brand new stuff. And I think it's so exciting for everybody to realize that their brain could be operating on a much higher level, and their life could be at a much higher level than it is now.
You know, let me just say, Professor Cortright, that you know, one of the things that when you get older that you really are concerned about, and is the fact that when you get older, the Alzheimer's and the dementia and the loss of memory, the slowing down of your mental faculties, everything becomes a lot slower for us when we are get older. So when I was reading your book, and I was honest with you and told you I couldn't get through all of it at this time, but I got through a really good portion of it. It just so happens that in my little circle here, there's people that I know that are having people deal with the kind of the lack of mental facilities, the dementia or Alzheimer's, what have you. And a few months ago, I was doing some research because I myself am not getting any younger either. I keep having them birthdays for some reason. But anyway, I wanted to find out, if there was some way to make myself feel like I was like in my 20s and 30s, brain-wise. Everything just clicked really fast, and you can do multitasking really fast. And I noticed that there's a few things that I'm not doing quite as fast as I used to, and it really began to. I really began to think about this. And I was like, well, I'm a big person on diet. I think that we need to eat better foods, and I cook and prepare all my own foods, and if I get really lucky, I even grow my own, but I certainly buy all local and organic, and that's one of the things that I do. I realize that all these wonderful vegetables and fruits and everything that we have has a benefit. That's what keeps our bodies alive, and we're biological beings, not chemical beings. So it makes more sense to put live biology, as it were, in us, as opposed to something that's artificial. So with this began a process of changing my own diet slightly and adding a few supplements that I just can't get through everything through my diet. And then lo and behold, here comes Professor Cortright with this book that gives me way more information than I had before. And I find it really, really synchronistic, especially in my own life. And I know that there's other people out there that are also dealing with the same thing. What happens when we get older? And I do know through some research in my younger years that the body is always replenishing itself. It's replenishing the cells. It's replenishing all the time. We slough off old ones and new ones come up. But how can we keep that rate going, right? And so I think with your book, it is giving an extraordinary viewpoint and packed with information on how that we can make this happen. And it's pretty simple stuff. We all have to eat, so we need to eat better than what we're doing. And you're also talking about lifestyle. But before we move forward, I want to let people know, maybe you can, I appreciate, first of all, your opening remarks about the consciousness. It is a huge thing. I mean, I meditate all the time. I'm into the metaphysical aspects of the unseen world, that kind of a thing, and very, very much attached to the energetics that are around us and how they affect us and influence us, that the silent energy. And that's why when the food is also part of that, because food is energy. It's our source of energy as well. So, your opening remarks were very apropos, so I want to say thank you so much for sharing that aspect of yourself. But I think it might be also interesting to note that you're also a licensed psychotherapist, and you've also done some extensive study into, I guess, behavior of us humans, and what makes us tick. So this all kind of goes along with putting it into some kind of an alignment for people. When the body and the mind and everything all sync up, there's an alignment that takes place, and that helps our consciousness and helps us grow and continue to grow. So what I think what I'd like for you to do is to get into kind of the aspect of, and I don't know how much research you've done into the Alzheimer and dementia and all of that. How does that wrap into the neurogenesis? Because that seems to be the big key word anymore, is dementia and Alzheimer. You hear that more than you don't anymore.
Yeah, that you're raising a huge issue here. And it turns out that much of the decline we experience cognitively as we get older is related to our lifestyle. And it also looks like Alzheimer's is basically a lifestyle disease. It's not inherent in growing old. That actually the decline we experience is due to so many of the just neurotoxic influences. We live in a very neurotoxic world, and we've all kind of just stumbled into it innocently without knowing it. Nobody knew that certain things clog up your brain, produce beta amyloid, slow down your...
Okay, explain that beta amyloid. What is that?
Beta amyloid is the plaque that accumulates in Alzheimer's. And when it accumulates, it begins to attack the hippocampus, which is responsible for processing new memory. And so in Alzheimer's, the hippocampus shrinks, and new memories stop being able to be formed. And memory is sort of like the key link in the self. When memory goes, executive function goes, working memory goes. It's like the ground gets pulled out from under the whole sense of self. And right now, according to the Alzheimer's Association, 1 in 3 seniors dies with either Alzheimer's or with some other form of dementia. And if present trend lines continue, 50% of the people who reach the age of 85 will have Alzheimer's within just a few years. Now that's pretty scary, because most of us are expected to live to be 85. That gives us a 50-50 chance of developing Alzheimer's. And right now, also if you look on the Alzheimer's website, Alzheimer's Association, it says this is the one major disease for which there's currently no treatment. There's nothing that can prevent it. There's nothing that can reverse it. There's nothing that can cure it. The pharmaceutical companies have now spent billions of dollars on drug trials trying to come up with something. We have a few expensive drugs that help with the symptoms for a few months. That's all. There's like nothing we can do. Right now it's a pretty hopeless situation. The drug trials, the billions of dollars and the hundreds of drug trials have actually come up with nothing. Zero. Zip. There is nothing that now can work with Alzheimer's. However, this research around neurogenesis and around holistic approaches to brain health are the one bit of evidence, the research around this, that gives us reason for hope. So recently there was a Buck Foundation research study done. Now, most of the research in this area is done by pharmaceutical companies or by academic researchers who are looking to discover the next new big drug that they can make a fortune on. That's fine, they have that right. But holistic research doesn't happen very much because it's hard to get it funded, because most of the ingredients in a holistic approach are free. And so there's a foundation here in California called the Buck Institute of Aging. And they did a very interesting experiment published last year that showed that people who had experienced cognitive decline, the kind of cognitive decline and memory problems associated with Alzheimer's, many of whom had to leave their jobs because of severe cognitive decline, using a kind of simplified version of the holistic approach offered in the book, they were able to reverse their cognitive decline and go back to work for the 2 years that they followed them in the study. And then another study came out of, a Finnish study came out in March of this year, published in Lancet. That was the first randomized controlled trial looking at if it was possible to prevent cognitive decline in those who are at risk for it. And again, using a very simplified version of what's in the book, they discovered that they were able to prevent cognitive decline in an at-risk population for the 2 years that they followed them. So this kind of holistic approach, body, heart, mind, spirit, every level of our being, it turns out works synergistically with the brain. If we just do one thing, that has a very limited impact on the brain. But if we use body, heart, mind, spirit, we're stimulating the brain in all of these ways, then we get a whole brain approach to health. And it turns out that Alzheimer's is almost completely a lifestyle illness, a lifestyle disease. And it begins decades before we actually see symptoms. So the time to start is now. If you're in your 20s or 30s, now is the time to start. And if you're in your 50s and 60s and 70s, now is also the time to start, because we can increase our rate of neurogenesis by 5 times with immense changes in cognition, emotion, physical health, spiritual well-being. But we, again, need this kind of whole brain, holistic approach in order to rejuvenate our brain and keep it young. Keep it not just young, but actually keep it functioning at a higher level than it's ever functioned at before.
Okay, so you've just, given us a whole bunch of information there in regards to what happens with us as we age and the Alzheimer's and the dementia. And one of the things that I did note was that in my own research is that it does start early on, but I think it's interesting that you've chosen the term lifestyle. So it's even more than just what you eat, it's everything. It's how you look at life. It's again, the whole body, mind, spirit. And I've always felt like there was not one part that was disconnected from the other. If you treat one thing, you have to treat all of it, whatever it is, because it doesn't just have a singular source, because we work in conjunction with all those parts.
Yes.
All those parts are part of who we are. So this is just really, really cool stuff. So you made the statement that we live in a very neurotoxic world. I couldn't agree more with that statement. I mean, go out and look at your skies, and the water that you drink that comes out of your tap, the pesticides they put in the ground, and the weed control, and you name it, it's just everywhere. So how does a person in this day and age, how are they able to bring some of the more natural aspects with all the neurotoxins? I mean, obviously this is an uphill battle in a sense until we can get rid of the chemtrails and all the junk that they're putting in the tap water, and quit putting our unnatural pesticides on our foods or GMOs or any of that stuff. I would love to hear some ideas from you as to how this could work for the average person. I think that would be probably really helpful for the listeners out there and the viewers as well.
Okay, good. Yeah, the book is really aimed at everybody, at the American public, and wanted to make this very accessible to everybody. And so it is, again, a body, heart, mind, spirit, every level, and it's a two-pronged strategy. First of all, we want to reduce or avoid those things that are neurotoxic, that slow down our rate of neurogenesis. And the other prong is we want to increase or maximize those things that are neurohealthy and which stimulate our rate of neurogenesis. So there's a lot of things that everybody can do for this. So there's a chapter on body, there's a chapter on heart, on emotional, our emotional state and relationships. There's a chapter on mind. There's a chapter on spirit and spiritual practices. But there's a separate chapter on diet, because diet is so important in this. And so the first thing is to avoid what is neurotoxic. And some of that involves avoiding foods that, as you're saying here, are loaded with pesticides and also GMOs, which are also triply, 10 times loaded with pesticides. You know, you talked about just the energetics of it. And there are clairvoyants who talk about how organic food has a greater auric field than poisoned food. It has more life energy in it than food that has pesticides on it. So eating as organically as we can is one thing for sure. We also want to avoid unhealthy fats. So the brain is made up of about 2/3 fat. And of that fat, 1/3 of it is DHA. Now, DHA is one of the omega-3 fatty acids, the kind of omega-3s we get from fish oils. So it turns out that omega-3 is one of the best stimulators of neurogenesis around. The brain starts to just explode with new brain cells with a high diet in omega-3 fatty acids. Now, most people don't get enough. You can get enough if you eat a lot of wild-caught fish. But even there, if you fry the fish, there's no change. They did this one experiment where they looked at people who ate fish 1 to 3 times a week. And they discovered they had 16% more gray matter, more neurons in the part of the brain responsible for higher functioning, unless they ate fried fish, in which case there was no difference between them and normals.
Okay, so that means if they baked the fish was different than frying it, is that what you're saying?
That's right, baking,
okay. So also let me go back to your idea of the clairvoyant there, because I actually am one. And when I prepare my food, I can feel that food, and it's one of the things that I've taught people through the years is how to go to the grocery store, because everybody has to, in order to purchase food or wherever, and determine what feels right to them, what does their body respond to. And just because you want green beans in your head today doesn't mean your body wants it today. So you have to learn which part of you is needing what. And it really is an energetic. And when I make my food, when I cook it, prepare it, whatever I'm doing with it, I always put love into it.
Perfect.
For me, cooking is not just to feed me and not to make me feel better in that sense that I'm no longer hungry, but it pulls in everything when I'm doing it, when I'm cooking it. So when I serve it to somebody, I'm serving them a little platter of love and try to accentuate the good things in it. And that's what I do when I'm cooking.
That's perfect. That's great.
Yeah.
You know, in Bhakti Yoga in India, an important part of Bhakti Yoga is being careful about what we put into our system. And so we want to put in purity-enhancing foods. And that includes the consciousness of the person who prepares the food. So if we're getting our food from an underpaid, overworked chef at McDonald's versus a loving partner who puts their love and devotion into the food, that consciousness goes into the food, and that's part of what we absorb. That's part of the energetic nourishment we take in from the food. Yeah, right on. That's beautiful.
Well, I have to say is that when I serve the food that I cook, I always, even if it's not seasoned correctly, you know, we all have some days in the kitchen that doesn't work exactly like we want it to. It's still made with the understanding that it's filled with love, and it's an honoring of who we are. And when you share that food, by the way, I think sharing food that you prepare is probably one of the highest forms of expression that you can almost give to somebody. Is you're sharing a part of them, a part of earth, a part of whatever, and the energetics, all of it, you're sharing it. Mm. And you're asking them to participate in that sharing experience. Mm. Yes. So yeah, so food is not just something that we use just as fuel. It becomes something quite sacred to me. And people have thought I was just a little off center when I talk to them about stuff like this, but I'm like, no, I'm telling you, it's the way it works. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to kind of go through that. Let's talk a little bit about the omega-3s. That's kind of where you left off in eating of the fish, and that's where I interrupted with the baking of it. Yeah. For people that cannot, and this is something that we can address a little bit later on in the show, but for a question for you to kind of keep in the back of your mind is the supplements. If people cannot eat fish 3 days a week or whatever it is or what have you, I would like to talk about some of the supplements and where we can find natural good supplements, because obviously some of them are chemically produced and not naturally produced. And I'd love to hear your idea for that, as well as getting into some more of this. So I apologize for interrupting, but those are a couple of questions that I really would love for you to answer when you get a minute. And before we do that, anybody out there that has a question, please post it in the chat box. I forgot to remind everybody. And my producer will get those to us, and so that Professor Cortright can answer those questions for us right on the air, right while we're here today. Okay.
Okay, well, good. No, you're raising really good questions, and important questions as well. So just to recap the thing around fried fish, like if we want to build a high-end house, we use really high-quality materials. You want to use rotting wood or waterlogged wood in that process. And it's the same with the brain. To build a good brain, high-quality brain, we need high-quality building materials. And some of these are energetic, as you're saying. We want to expose ourselves to good energetic influences. And some of them on the physical level involve high-quality fats. And we want to avoid oxidized, unhealthy fats. So high-quality fats are fats that are not oxidized. And low-quality, unhealthy, bad fats are fats that have been oxidized. And one way that fats get oxidized is through cooking at high temperatures. So fried food, whether it's fried fish or fried anything, changes the fats. It oxidizes them. And when those oxidized fats get into your bloodstream, after your body absorbs them, what they do is they oxidize the cholesterol in your bloodstream. And oxidized cholesterol produces heart disease. It builds up atherosclerosis, builds up deposits on the inside of our blood vessels, and it also produces inflammation. And inflammation slows neurogenesis way down. And inflammation also chews up the inside of our blood vessels. So fried food is one of the worst things we can do for our brain. And I hate to say this because I used to love fish and chips. I still love fish and chips, probably, but I don't eat it anymore. It's bad news for the brain. So the people who ate fried fish had no difference in their amount of gray matter versus those who had baked fish or poached fish or fish cooked at a low temperature. we experience through our brain, right? Every physical sensation, every emotion that we have, every hope, every dream, every thought we have, and every spiritual state that we experience. We all experience it through the brain. And if the quality of our brain is low, the quality of our consciousness is not going to be what it could be. And if the quality of our brain is high, we're going to have the optimal possibility for consciousness expansion and deepening. So in focusing on the brain and neuroscience, I learned about this paradigm shift that's occurred in neuroscience about 15 years ago, when they discovered that neurogenesis happens throughout our lifetime. So what neurogenesis is it's the process of making new brain cells, right? It's the genesis of new neurons, the birth of new brain cells in the brain. And they used to believe that we stopped growing new brain cells once we were in our early 20s or so. And after that, it was just a solutional resilience, protection from anxiety, stress, and depression, and heightened immunity. So it turns out that our rate of neurogenesis is about the most important biomarker for brain health and for the quality of life that most people have never heard of. And most of this literature is just in the neuroscience literature, and I thought everybody needs to know about this. Neuroscience is too important just to be left to the neuroscientists. Everybody needs to know about this. And so this book is about how to increase your rate of neurogenesis. And it turns out that just about all of us can increase our rate of neurogenesis by 5 times, with really quite astonishing effects on our brain health and on the quality of our life, that we are just about all operating way below capacity, way below where we could be. And we never knew this until a few years ago. This is brand new, like really brand new stuff. And I think it's so exciting for everybody to really
significant breakthroughs in how to keep ourselves younger no matter how old we are, and I think there's quite a few of you out there, I know my hand is raised, could use some of this information. Dr. Cortright, Professor Cortright, he's one and the same. He's done an extensive amount, as I said, of research, and what I'd like to do now is to bring him on and have him kind of just introduce himself and how he got into the whole idea of neurogenesis, and maybe you can even explain, Professor Cortright, of what neurogenesis actually stands for, so that our audience can be a little bit more educated, because I know I certainly got an education through your book.
Okay, yeah, thank you for having me on. So I got interested in neuroscience, the brain, really through consciousness. My major interest professionally and personally has really been consciousness on every level, body, heart, mind, and spirit. And what this led me to really was focusing on the brain as well. Because everything we experience in our consciousness, slow, gradual, die off. And then 15, 17 years ago, they discovered that no, actually the brain makes new brain cells throughout our entire lifetime. And for a long time, they didn't know what the significance of this was. But recently, past 5 or 10 years, it's become clear that our rate of neurogenesis, that is, the rate at which we make new brain cells, has a very powerful effect on the quality of our brain and the quality of our life. So a low rate of neurogenesis, a low rate of making new brain cells, is associated with cognitive decline, with memory problems, with anxiety, with stress, and with depression, as well as health problems, lowered immunity. And the opposite, high rates of neurogenesis, are associated with cognitive enhancement, rapid learning, problem solving, robust emotional
Good evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you are on this beautiful planet. This is Rebecca Jernigan coming to you live from the heart of America to around the globe via the World Wide Web, journeying into the realms of the known to the unknown. You're listening and watching Journeys with Rebecca from Project Camelot TV Network. Thank you, everyone. Welcome, and I'm so very, very happy to introduce to you guys my guest for today. His name is Professor Brant Cortright, and he has written, his latest book is on the neurogenesis diet and lifestyle, upgrade your brain and upgrade your life. And I've done some research on Professor Cortright's work, and he has really made some very significant